Have you ever heard an album so badly recorded that you didn't know whether to laugh or cry? Some legendary bands took huge risks to stay relevant, while others kept making music even after losing their iconic frontman. And then there are albums that weren't just bad attempts at reinvention, they were doomed from the start. Today we're diving into the top 10 worst albums in rock history. Some came from legendary acts that should have known better, while others, like the Shags, were train wrecks from day one. Stick around, you won't believe what went wrong with these infamous records. Number 10, Black Sabbath, Forbidden. Black Sabbath's Forbidden is often considered the band's lowest point, and for good reason. Released in 1995, it marked the end of their original lineup studio recordings, and sadly didn't live up to their legendary reputation. One of the biggest missteps was the awkward inclusion of rapper Ice-T, who contributed guest vocals on Illusion of Power. This collaboration felt forced, and fans were left scratching their heads wondering how a heavy metal icon ended up mixing with a hip-hop star.
Powerful, who are you fooling? You're caught in a complex catacomb of your own inadequacies and pitiful weaknesses.
The album's biggest issue, however, was the uninspired songwriting. Tracks like The Hand That Rocks the Cradle and Shaking Off the Chains felt like weak imitations of past Sabbath greatness. While Sick and Tired came across as clumsy and uninspired.
All my friends are gone, but I won't run from you.
Tony Iommi's guitar work is still solid, but it couldn't save the lackluster material or the band's attempt at a more commercial sound. Forbidden was meant to be a grand farewell, but instead, it ended up as a disappointing swan song for Sabbath's Ozzy-era lineup. Number 9, The Doors, Other Voices. After the death of Jim Morrison in 1971, the Doors were left to carry on without the charismatic frontman who had been the heart and soul of the band. Other Voices, their first album without Morrison, is often viewed as a pale imitation of their earlier work. The surviving members, keyboardist Ray Manzarek, guitarist Robbie Krieger, and drummer John Dinsmore, tried to fill the void, but the results were underwhelming. Tracks like Tightrope Ride and Ships with Sails were decent, but they lacked the emotional depth and raw energy that Morrison brought to the table.
Well, all alone, gotta find a new home. Always bring you back to me.
The album's biggest flaw is how it highlights the loss of Morrison's voice, not just literally, but metaphorically. Without his poetic presence and unique persona, the band seemed directionless. While Other Voices isn't a complete disaster, it feels more like a faint echo of what once was, lacking the punch, charisma, and spirit that made the Doors legends. Number 8, Billy Idol, Cyberpunk. Billy Idol's Cyberpunk was an ambitious but disastrous attempt to blend rock with futuristic techno. Released in 1993, the album was Idol's foray into the cyberpunk genre, hoping to capture the edgy, dystopian vibe of the time.
Well, you could suck my land, baby.
Unfortunately, the result felt more like a gimmick than a genuine reinvention. Tracks like Shock to the System and Venus, with their overly experimental production, became cringeworthy examples of Idol's attempt to stay relevant in an era dominated by electronic music.
Oh yeah, 'cause there a man who would be king and the world stood still.
The lyrics were often laughable, and the techno beats, though groundbreaking for the time, clashed horribly with Idol's rock sensibilities. The album's production was all over the place, with attempts at futuristic sounds that felt awkward rather than cool. Idol's ambition was clear, but the execution left fans and critics alike scratching their heads. While cyberpunk might be a fascinating train wreck in rock history, it's also a perfect example of when reinvention goes horribly wrong. Number 7. Motley Crue, Generation Swine. Released in 1997, Generation Swine was Motley Crue's attempt to reinvent themselves for the 90s with a more industrial and alt-rock vibe. However, the result was a chaotic mix that didn't resonate with fans. The return of Vince Neil on vocals should have reignited the band's chemistry, but instead, it highlighted how disconnected the group had become. Tracks like Afraid and Find Myself were a jarring departure from the glam metal sound Motley Crue had perfected in the 80s, with the industrial influences feeling forced and out of place. The band's essence, raunchy, high-energy rock, was lost in a sea of experimental production that didn't match the vibe they'd made famous. Fans were left confused, as the album tried too hard to fit into the 90s alt-rock movement, but lacked the authenticity or power of the era's best acts. Ultimately, Generation Swine was a misguided attempt to modernize Motley Crue, leaving fans yearning for the swaggering, leather-clad anthems of their past. Number 6. The Clash, Cut the Crap. By 1985, The Clash was hanging on by a thread. With Mick Jones out of the picture, their final album, Cut the Crap, was less of a punk rebellion and more of a confusing mess. Imagine stripping away everything that made The Clash legendary, the raw energy, the gritty political edge, and replacing it with synthetic drum machines and lifeless production. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. Tracks like This Is England and We Are the Clash tried to recapture the band's former glory, but instead they felt robotic and soulless. Joel Strummer did his best to hold things together, but even his signature fire couldn't save an album that sounded more like a cheap imitation of the Clash rather than the real thing. This is England. This night we got one thing. Cut the Crap was exactly what its title suggested. Fans rejected it, critics tore it apart, and just like that, one of punk's greatest bands went out with a whimper instead of a roar. Number 5. Soundtrack to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
It was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play.
The Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band soundtrack, released in 1978, is a bizarre attempt to pay tribute to the Beatles' iconic album, but it quickly became infamous for all the wrong reasons. Featuring the Bee Gees, Peter Frampton, and an array of other stars, the album's performances were awkward, lackluster, and in many cases, downright cheesy. The Bee Gees' falsettos on With a Little Help from My Friends and on A Day in the Life felt forced and out of place, draining the original songs of their magic and depth.
Getting high with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a having read the book I love to tell.
What was supposed to be a celebration of the Beatles' masterpiece instead came off as a shallow cash grab. The performances lack the soul and creativity that made the original Sgt. Pepper's a groundbreaking album.
'Cause I'm going to strawberry fields.
Fans were left cringing at the clumsy renditions, making this soundtrack a prime example of how not to honor rock history. Number 4, Van Halen, Van Halen 3. By 1998, Van Halen was no stranger to shakeups, but Van Halen 3 proved that not all change is good. Enter Gary Cherone, the former Extreme frontman who stepped in as the band's third lead singer. The result? A bizarre identity crisis of an album that left fans scratching their heads. Tracks like Without You and Fire in the Hole had none of the swagger, hooks, or fist-pumping energy of classic Van Halen. Instead, they felt meandering and uninspired, like a band desperately trying to find its footing but slipping further into the abyss. Even Eddie Van Halen's legendary guitar work, normally the band's saving grace, couldn't rescue this sinking ship. The real problem? Zero chemistry. Cherone was a talented vocalist, but he was the wrong fit, and it showed. Instead of a triumphant new era, Van Halen 3 became a cautionary tale in rock history, proof that not every reinvention is worth the risk. Number 3, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Mardi Gras.
Early in the evening, just about supper time.
Creedence Clearwater Revival was on its last legs, and Mardi Gras was the sound of a band unraveling before our ears. After years of dominating as the group's creative force, John Fogerty finally gave in to pressure and let the other members contribute their own songs. The result? A sloppy, mismatched album that feels more like a breakup letter than a cohesive record.
Down on the corner, out in the street.
Tracks like Take It Like a Friend and Sweet Hitchhiker lack the swampy charm and tight songwriting that made CCR legends. Instead, we got a mix of half-baked country, uninspired rock, and the unmistakable feeling that nobody was having fun.
Hope you take it like a friend. It's a shame to see you cry.
Down on the corner, out in the street. Then the poor boys are playing.
Even Fogerty himself later called it the worst album ever made by a major band. And honestly, he had a point. Mardi Gras wasn't just a bad album, it was CCR's swan song, a sad and messy farewell from a band that once ruled the charts.
Down on the corner, out in the street.
Number 2, Lou Reed and Metallica, Lulu. Released in 2011, Lulu is widely considered one of the most disastrous collaborations in rock history. The album fuses Lou Reed's spoken word poetry with Metallica's aggressive thrash metal, but the resulting mix is a bizarre, unlistenable mess.
I attract you and repel you. A science of the heart and blood.
Tracks like The View and I Am the Table are notorious for their strange, incoherent lyrics, with Reed's odd-spoken delivery clashing horribly with Metallica's heavy instrumentation.
Stand before me. I am the devil. I am all this. I am the roots.
The infamous line, I Am the Table, became a meme, symbolizing just how out of place and cringeworthy the entire album felt. Even the most hardcore fans of both Reed and Metallica were horrified by Lulu.
I am the table. I am the view.
What was supposed to be a groundbreaking artistic endeavor turned into a complete train wreck that alienated listeners. It's not just bad, it's an absolute misfire that no one saw coming. With its awkward blend of avant-garde poetry and thrash metal, Lulu is a collaboration so misguided that it's hard to believe it even happened. Number 1. The Shags, Philosophy of the World.
The rich people want what the poor people got, and the poor people want what...
Few albums are as uniquely terrible as Philosophy of the World by the Shags. Released in 1969, this album is often described as so bad it's good, or just plain bad, depending on who you ask.
Following it was like riding on a roller coaster.
The Shags, a trio of sisters from New Hampshire, were pushed into making music by their father, despite having little to no musical training. The result? Offbeat drumming, out-of-tune guitars, and vocals that sound like an awkward school recital.
The short people want what the tall people got.
Songs like My Pal Foot Foot and That Little Sports Car are infamous for their almost surreal lack of rhythm or melody.
My pal's name is Foot Foot Foot. He always likes to roam. My pal's name is Foot Foot Sports Car on the road. On the road. I thought I knew the fella.
Despite its undeniable awfulness, Philosophy of the World has developed a cult following. Some argue its raw, unfiltered sound is a kind of outsider art, while others consider it one of the worst albums ever recorded.
The little kids want what the big kids got, and the big kids want...
Whether you hear it as a charming disaster or an unlistenable mess, one thing is certain, there's nothing else quite like it.
Want long hair, and the girls with long hair want short hair.
These albums may have missed the mark, but they're a part of rock history nonetheless. From bloated productions to misguided experiments, these records show that even legends can stumble. Which of these albums do you think is the most disastrous? Drop a comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. For more deep dives into rock history, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and keep the music alive. And check out our video on the most underrated rock albums you need to hear.